If you're cruising to Cabo San Lucas, you can screw up this port before you ever set foot in Mexico, and we almost did. I showed up 15 minutes early to get our tender tickets off Navigator of the Seas, and the line was already halfway down the Royal Promenade. Then, when we finally made it to Cabo, we stepped off the tender and immediately walked into what felt like a wall of people trying to sell us boat rides, fishing trips, water taxis, beach trips, basically anything they could possibly put you on that floats. And it was August, it was hot, it was humid. And if we had gotten off that ship with absolutely no plan, I honestly think we would have been back on board within an hour, wondering why everybody loves Cabo so much. But we did have a plan. For about $40 a person, we booked an independent glass bottom boat excursion that took us around Land's End, one of the most famous sites in Cabo, the Cabo Arch, and all the way around towards the Pacific Ocean. And not only did this end up being one of the best values of our entire cruise, we arrived just days after a major hurricane had been churning offshore and saw something underneath the Cabo Arch that most visitors never get to see. By the time we come back here later this year, it will definitely be gone. So if Cabo San Lucas is coming up on your cruise, I'm going to show you exactly how the tender process worked, what our $40 excursion was actually like, and what I would and would not do in Cabo. And the biggest thing I would change the next time we come here. Hi everyone, I'm Nick, and together with my husband Tony, this is Travel with Nick and Tony. Today we're talking about our day in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. We visited Cabo on our 7-night Mexican Riviera cruise on Royal Caribbean's Navigator of the Seas. We left Los Angeles, spent one full day at sea, and then our first port was Cabo San Lucas. After Cabo, we continued on to Mazatlán and Puerto Vallarta before having 2 more sea days back to Los Angeles. And overall, we absolutely loved this itinerary. Navigator of the Seas has been sailing these Mexican Riviera cruises from LA, but that's about to change. Starting in October of 2026, Navigator is moving across the Pacific and will begin sailing from Singapore. Voyager of the Seas is coming to LA, and Royal Caribbean already has Voyager scheduled on the Mexican Riviera itineraries that include Cabo San Lucas. We're actually going to be back on Voyager later this year. So while this particular trip was on Navigator, pretty much everything we're talking about today applies to whether you're coming here on Voyager, Navigator, or another cruise ship. Because the first thing you need to understand is Cabo is not a normal cruise port. When you arrive in Cabo San Lucas, your cruise ship does not pull up to the pier. It anchors offshore. And then smaller boats called tenders take everyone from the ship into the Cabo Marina. And personally, I kind of like the idea of tender ports. There's something cool about getting into this relatively tiny boat and then looking back at this enormous cruise ship sitting out in the middle of the water. But tender ports introduce a problem. Not everybody can get off the ship at once. And if you're trying to get off early, you may need a tender ticket. We had booked an excursion independently through Shore Excursions Group. It wasn't a Royal Caribbean excursion. And because we had a specific meeting time on land, I wanted to make sure everybody was off the boat early and onto those tenders. Royal Caribbean announced what time they would begin handing out the tender tickets. And in my mind, I thought, okay, I'll go down 15 minutes early. That should be plenty of time. Apparently, about half the ship had a different idea because when I arrived 15 minutes early, the line was already clear down the Royal Promenade. People had gotten there well before I did. So this is probably my number one logistical tip for Cabo. If you have an early independent excursion like we did, get your tender tickets early. Don't assume that because tickets aren't being distributed yet, no one's going to be waiting. They will be. Now, the good news was that once they actually started handing out the tickets, everything moved pretty quickly. And at least on our sailing, the entire family didn't need to stand in that line. One person could pick up the tender tickets for the whole group. So I got our tickets for everyone. And they also weren't necessarily calling one tender number at a time to get off the boat. They might announce tender groups 1 through 6 may now proceed, and then 7 through 12. So once they got going, they were moving a lot of people. And from the time our group was called until we actually stepped onto land in Cabo, I would say the whole thing took somewhere around 20 minutes. So it really wasn't bad. But if I had an excursion with a tight meeting time, I would absolutely want to get an early tender ticket. And keep in mind, if you book an excursion directly through Royal Caribbean, just follow the instructions they give you because your meeting and tender arrangements are different. They're generally just included in the ticket they give you in your stateroom. So eventually our tender pulls into the Cabo Marina. We get off and welcome to Cabo. Would you like a water taxi, a boat tour, fishing trip, glass bottom boats, snorkeling, the beach, tequila, maybe even a timeshare? I'm exaggerating a little, but really not. These people are everywhere and offering you tons of different options for excursions and transportation. And if you've never been to Cabo before, it can feel definitely overwhelming. So you say, no thank you. You walk about 6 feet and someone else asks the same question. No thank you. 6 more feet, another boat tour. No one gave us any major problems, but you definitely need to be prepared for it, and don't feel bad if you just keep walking and kind of ignore people. Because we already had booked an excursion through Shore Excursions Group, we weren't looking for anything else, and we knew approximately where we needed to go. The company operating the cruise excursion was just a short walk from where the tender dropped us off, so the advice here was really simple. Before you leave the ship, screenshot your excursion instructions, know the name of the company, know where you're meeting them, and when everyone else starts offering you something, just keep walking. This brings me to what I think is probably the most important thing I learned about Cabo. Have a plan. I would not recommend getting off the ship in Cabo with your entire itinerary being, well, let's just see what happens. Because if you stay right around where the tender drops you off, you're primarily experiencing the Cabo Marina. There's plenty going on. There are restaurants, there are shops, bars, Senor Frogs is always going off, there are boats everywhere. But if you spend an hour wandering around the marina and then you get back on the ship, I don't think you're really experiencing why people love Cabo San Lucas so much. We've been here before, and on other visits, we've walked a little farther into town. We've gotten tacos, we've gotten elotes, which are those incredible Mexican street corns with mayonnaise, cheese, and chile. Probably about 12,000 calories, but worth every single one. There's plenty you can do. You can go to the beach, you can snorkel, you can go fishing, you can explore downtown or the old town Cabo, you can grab food. You don't need some enormous, expensive excursion, but do something and plan it out beforehand. For us, spending the $40 on this little boat tour completely changed what our Cabo day would have been otherwise. So we booked a glass bottom boat tour through Shore Excursions Group. When we booked it, we paid around $40 per person. Obviously, prices can change, so whatever the current price is, make sure to check it out. But our tour lasted about an hour, and honestly, for $40, I thought it was fantastic. We got into this relatively small boat and headed out of the marina toward Land's End. Our guide was pointing out the different rock formations along the way. There are beaches tucked in between some of these huge rocks. There were people swimming. There were people hanging out along the shoreline. And the farther you go, the more dramatic the landscape becomes. And then eventually you see it. El Arco, the arch of Cabo San Lucas. Probably the single most recognizable landmark in Cabo. And it really is impressive when you see it from the water. The arch sits at the Land's End, right around the southern tip of the Baja California Peninsula, where the waters of the Sea of Cortez and the Pacific Ocean meet. And of course, everybody wants the picture. You know those beautiful pictures people post from Cabo? You're on a boat, the arch is perfectly behind you, there's no one else around, and it looks incredibly peaceful. This is what's actually happening. There were boats everywhere. Water taxis, glass-bottom boats, private tours, tour boats, everyone's circling around and trying to get that same photograph. But you have to give these captains credit because somehow they make it work. They basically rotate everybody through the perfect position. You get the boat into place, everybody takes their pictures, and for about 30 seconds it does look like you have the whole Cabo Arch completely to yourself. Meanwhile, there are probably 30 boats floating outside of the frame, but who cares? You get the picture. But there was something very different about the arch when we visited, and we didn't realize how unusual it was until our guide pointed it out. Look underneath these rocks. There's beach there, and normally there isn't. Just a few days before our visit, Hurricane Genevieve had become an extremely powerful hurricane well offshore Baja California. Earlier, on July 27th, the National Hurricane Center estimated maximum sustained winds of about 160 miles an hour, Category 5 intensity. While the storm remained hundreds of miles southwest of Baja California, but around that same time, Cabo was dealing with powerful ocean swells and shifting conditions. Then something unusual happened. A temporary beach washed up and appeared underneath the Cabo Arch and underneath the different rock formations around the area. I went back and looked it up. Local reporting documented that this beach reappeared on July 27th. Experts explain that changing wind, waves, currents, erosion, and sediment can occasionally deposit enough sand here to create an exposed beach. And then, when the conditions change again, the ocean will wash it back away. So we happened to arrive during this relatively brief period when there was all of this sand sitting underneath and around the arch, which is pretty cool, because if we come back here later, it may look completely different. And that's one of those things I just love about traveling. We didn't book some special excursion to see a rare natural phenomenon. We didn't even know it was happening. We just happened to be there at the right time. Now let's discuss our other memorable Cabo experience, the heat. We were there at the beginning of August and it was hot as hell. And I'm not talking about that pleasant, oh, we're in Mexico, isn't this wonderful? No, it was, I've been outside for 7 minutes and now my shirt is attached to my body. Hot and humid. So if you're doing this Mexican Riviera itinerary during July, August, or September, plan for the heat. Bring water, use sunscreen, wear something lightweight, and bring a hat. And if you're planning an excursion that involves a lot of walking in the middle of the afternoon, just understand what you're signing up for. We're going to go back to Cabo later in the year, and I'm really looking forward to comparing the experience when it's not the middle of summer. Now here's another cruising lesson that's taken us a while to learn. You don't have to maximize every single second in port. There is this weird guilt that sometimes comes with cruising. You're in Mexico, you came all this way. The ship doesn't leave for another 4 hours. You have to keep exploring. But no, you don't. We did our excursion, we saw the arch, we got fantastic pictures. We saw something unusual that we probably won't see ever again. We walked around the marina and eventually we were so hot and sweaty we were just ready to go back to the ship. And honestly, there's something kind of fun about that too. You get back in the tender, you start heading across the water, and the Navigator of the Seas gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you're pulling up directly alongside this massive cruise ship that's just sitting there at anchor. It's one of those perspectives of a cruise ship that you really only get at a tender port. Then we got back on board, got into the air conditioning, which felt amazing, got something cold to drink, showered up, and enjoyed the rest of our day. No regrets whatsoever. So would we do this Cabo excursion again? Absolutely. In fact, we're heading back in November, and we'll be traveling with some different people who haven't seen the Arch before. I would have no problem doing something very similar again, and especially with Shore Excursions Group. Was it the fanciest excursion we've ever done? Absolutely not. It wasn't some private luxury yacht. But for $40, we got a boat ride, we saw Land's End, we saw the Arch, we went around the Pacific Ocean, and we learned all about the different rock formations. We got great pictures, and the whole thing took about an hour. That's exactly the type of inexpensive cruise excursion that we love. Afterwards, you still have the flexibility to go do something else, eat, walk around, head to the beach, or in our case, just jump back on the ship because it was so hot. So if you're coming to Cabo San Lucas on a cruise, here's what we want you to remember. Cabo is a tender port, and you need to figure out the tender process before that morning. If they're handing out the tender tickets, get there early. Number 2, have a plan before getting off the ship. It doesn't have to be expensive, but you really actually want to know what you're going to do before you just get off and wander around. Number 3, don't let the marina overwhelm you. If you've already booked something, know your meeting point and just say no thank you and keep walking. Number 4, if you've never seen the Arch, one of these relatively inexpensive boat tours is a really easy way to experience one of the most iconic sites in Cabo without committing your entire port day to a big excursion. And number 5, if you're visiting in the summer, respect the heat. And when you've had enough, go back to the ship. You're on vacation. This is not an endurance competition. Overall, we loved our day in Cabo. And honestly, I think what made the difference was that we had something planned. If we'd simply gotten off the tender, fought our way through all of those excursion vendors, wandered around the marina in the August heat, and then got back on board, I probably would have told you Cabo was not as great. Instead, for about $40 a person, we got on the water, saw one of the most beautiful landmarks in Mexico, got some incredible pictures, and even happened to see the Arch during a pretty unusual moment. So for us, completely worth it. Now, we want to know what you do in Cabo. If you visited Cabo San Lucas on a cruise, tell us in the comments, what's one thing we should do when we go back? Did you find an amazing taco place or a beach club or a better excursion? Or is there something in Cabo that most cruise passengers completely miss? Like I said, we're heading back, so I'm genuinely interested in ideas. And if you've got an upcoming Mexican Riviera cruise on Navigator or Voyager or another ship visiting Cabo, hopefully this video helped you plan your day. If it did, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to Travel with Nick and Tony, and follow along because we have a lot more cruises coming up. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next cruise.